The polished cockpit of the Boeing 707, bathed in the soft blue glow of its instrument panels, was a sanctuary of calm before the storm. Below-ground crews at JFK scurried like ants preparing Stellara Air Flight 710 for its transatlantic journey to London. In command was Captain Michael Jensen, a man with a sterling 30-year record, the epitome of a sky god. But on this crisp autumn evening, his legendary composure was about to shatter. When his co-pilot, the sharp and highly praised First Officer Marcus Thorne, walked in, Jensen's world tilted. One look, one venomous decision, and a single sentence would ignite a firestorm that would consume a career, unravel a hidden past, and serve a dish of karma so cold it would freeze hell over. What he said next didn't just delay a flight, it ended a life as he knew it. Captain Michael Jensen savored the quiet hum of the auxiliary power unit. It was his symphony, the prelude to the roar of the twin General Electric GE90 engines that he commanded with the ease of a master conductor. At 58, Jensen was a titan of the skies. His silver-streaked hair, chiseled jaw, and the crisp, authoritative lines of his uniform all spoke of a man in total control. He was ex-Air Force, had flown everything from F-16s in Desert Storm to the most advanced commercial airliners on the planet. He was a pilot's pilot, a man who believed in order hierarchy and a certain kind of cockpit, one that looked and felt exactly as it had for the past 3 decades. He performed his pre-flight checks with a muscle memory honed by over 20,000 flight hours. Each switch flipped, each dial checked was a small prayer to the gods of aviation. Everything was nominal. Outside, the lights of New York City began to sparkle as dusk settled. 412 souls were booked on this flight, entrusting their lives to him, and he took that trust as a sacred vow. The cockpit door hissed open. "Evening, Captain," a smooth, confident voice said. Jensen looked up from his checklist, a perfunctory smile ready on his lips. It froze there. Standing before him was First Officer Marcus Thorne. Jensen had read the name on the flight roster, but he hadn't placed it. Now seeing the man in person, a cold, unfamiliar coil of something ugly tightened in his gut. Marcus Thorne was everything a modern pilot should be. He was young in his early 30s, with a sharp, intelligent face and an aura of calm competence. He was impeccably dressed, his movements efficient as he settled into the right-hand seat. He was also black. For Jensen, it was like a glitch in the matrix. In his mind, the cockpit had a certain look, a certain demographic. He'd flown with pilots of all backgrounds. Of course, the airline industry was changing, but this was his cockpit. The transatlantic run to London Heathrow was a prestige route, a route for senior captains, and he expected a certain familiarity. Thorne's presence felt like a disruption to the natural order of things, a forced change he resented. "Thorne," Jensen said, his voice clipped devoid of the usual camaraderie. He didn't offer a handshake. Marcus, unfazed, began his own flow of checks. "Weather over the Atlantic is looking clear. A little bit of expected chop around Gander, but nothing this bird can't handle. Passenger load is full, cargo is loaded. We're looking at an on-time departure." His voice was professional, his knowledge impeccable. He had graduated top of his class from Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, had a flawless record, and was on the fast track to a captaincy. He was by every objective measure an exemplary pilot. But Jensen wasn't seeing the pilot. He was seeing a symbol of everything that was changing too fast in his world. Affirmative action, diversity quotas, a new generation that hadn't, in his view, paid their dues the way he had. A bitter, irrational resentment began to brew thick and poisonous. He imagined Thorne got his position not just on merit, but because of a box he ticked on an application form. The thought was an insult to his own hard-won career. He watched Thorne out of the corner of his eye. Every smooth action, every confident call to air traffic control grated on him. He felt a primal possessive anger. This was his sanctuary, his domain, and he would not have it violated. "Final cabin check is complete, Captain. We're cleared to close the doors," came the voice of the lead flight attendant, Sarah, through the intercom. "Hold on that!" Jensen barked, his voice suddenly hard as steel. Sarah, a veteran with 20 years of service, was taken aback. "Captain, is there an issue with the aircraft?" Jensen didn't answer her. He unbuckled his harness, the click echoing in the tense silence. He turned his full attention to Marcus Thorne, his blue eyes like chips of ice. Marcus stopped his work and looked at his captain, a flicker of confusion on his face. "Is everything all right, Mike?" The use of his first name, a standard sign of cockpit equality, felt like a deliberate slight to Jensen. The coil in his gut tightened into a knot of pure venom. "No, First Officer," Jensen said, his voice low and dangerous. "Everything is not all right. I have a problem. A problem with the aircraft. With the flight plan." Marcus asked his professionalism, a stark contrast to Jensen's simmering rage. Jensen stared at him for a long, unbearable moment. The hum of the electronics seemed to fade into the background, the entire world narrowing to the space between these two men. He finally uttered the words that would detonate his life. "The problem," Jensen said, his voice dripping with a contempt he no longer tried to hide, "is you. I'm not flying with you." The words hung in the air, heavy and radioactive. Marcus Thorne stared at Captain Jensen, his mind struggling to process the statement. It was so direct, so unprofessional, so utterly outside the bounds of protocol that it felt unreal. He thought he must have misheard. "I'm sorry, Captain," Marcus said, his voice perfectly. Even a testament to a discipline that ran bone deep. "Could you repeat that I must have misunderstood?" "There's no misunderstanding." Jensen snarled, his face a mask of defiant arrogance. "I said I am not flying this aircraft with you in that seat. This is my flight deck. I am the pilot in command, and I have final say on crew compatibility and safety. And I am telling you I am not comfortable." The phrase crew compatibility was a shield, a weak piece of jargon to hide the naked bigotry beneath. Marcus understood instantly. This wasn't about his skills. This wasn't about some mistake he'd made. This was about the color of his skin. A cold fury different from Jensen's hot rage began to build in him. But he wouldn't give the man the satisfaction of a reaction. "Captain Jensen," Marcus said, his tone still maddeningly calm, "I can assure you my qualifications are in order. I have over 5,000 hours, a perfect safety record, and I've flown this route a dozen times. If you have a specific concern about my performance, I invite you to state it for the record." He was invoking procedure, creating a verbal paper trail. He knew that in the sterile, rule-bound world of aviation, unsubstantiated claims evaporated. Jensen sneered. "I don't need a specific concern. I have experience. I have instinct. My gut tells me this pairing is unsafe. End of story." Just then, the cockpit door opened a crack. It was Sarah, the lead flight attendant, her face etched with worry. The departure time had come and gone, and the passengers were getting restless. "Captain Gate Control is asking for an update. Is there a maintenance issue we need to announce?" she whispered, sensing the toxic atmosphere. Before Jensen could answer, Marcus spoke his voice, clear and resonant, ensuring Sarah could hear every word. Captain Jensen has just informed me that he refuses to fly the aircraft with me as his first officer. He has cited a concern for crew compatibility. Sarah's eyes widened in disbelief. She had seen everything in her career: medical emergencies, disruptive passengers, mechanical failures. But she had never seen this. A captain refusing to fly with his co-pilot for no stated reason, moments before pushing back from the gate. She looked from Marcus's stony, professional face to Jensen's furious one, and she understood. "Get out!" Jensen snapped at her, pointing a trembling finger at the door. "This is a flight deck matter." Sarah backed out, closing the door softly. But she didn't go back to the cabin. She went straight to the galley, picked up the crew phone, and made a call to the Stellara Air Operations Center at JFK. She spoke in a low, urgent tone, relaying exactly what she had heard. The wheels of a corporate machine, far bigger and more powerful than Michael Jensen, began to turn. In the cockpit, Jensen felt a surge of triumph. He had drawn his line in the sand. He believed he was untouchable. His seniority, his perfect record, his reputation as a legend within the airline, they were his armor. He was certain they would simply find him another co-pilot, some young kid he approved of, and this thorn would be quietly reassigned, perhaps with a note in his file about creating friction. "Now," Jensen said, turning back to Marcus, "I suggest you unbuckle yourself and vacate my flight deck. I'll inform operations we have a last-minute crew change." Marcus didn't move. He sat there, a pillar of defiance in the face of raw prejudice. "No, Captain, I will not. I am the assigned first officer for this flight. I am qualified, fit to fly, and I have done nothing to warrant removal. If this flight is to be cancelled, it will be on your authority, and your reason will be logged. So I ask you again, state for the record a specific performance-related reason for your refusal to fly with me." It was a brilliant move, a checkmate in 2 sentences. He was forcing Jensen to either put his racism into the official log or back down. Jensen's face turned a shade of purple. The calm, superior pilot was gone, replaced by a cornered animal. He was about to unleash a torrent of abuse when a sharp electronic chirp cut through the tension. It was the ACAR's printer, the small machine that printed text messages from the airline. A slip of paper slowly spooled out. Jensen ripped it from the machine. The message was short and brutal. "CPT Jensen. FO Thorn. Do not move. Do not speak to ATC. Shut down APU. Await contact from Chief Pilot on Freak 131.5. Stand by." The blood drained from Jensen's face. The frequency 131.5 was a discrete management channel. The order to shut down the auxiliary power unit was significant. It meant the plane wasn't going anywhere for a while. This was no longer a simple crew change. This was an intervention. Marcus watched him, his expression unreadable. He had won the standoff, but the battle he knew was just beginning. The hum of the APU wound down, plunging the cockpit into an eerie, tomb-like silence, broken only by the frantic beating of Michael Jensen's own heart. The silence in the cockpit was no longer a sanctuary. It was a vacuum. For 10 agonizing minutes, neither man spoke. Jensen sat rigid in his seat, the ACAR's message clutched in his hand, the paper crinkling with the tremor of his rage. Marcus remained in his seat, his posture relaxed but his eyes alert. He was a spectator now, waiting for the system he had put his faith in to work. Finally, the radio crackled to life, a disembodied voice cutting through the quiet. "Stellara Ops to Captain Jensen, Flight 710. Are you on frequency?" Jensen fumbled for the push-to-talk button. "This is Captain Jensen," he managed his voice hoarse. "Patching you through to Ms. Reed," the voice said. Jensen's heart sank. Lana Reed. Not the chief pilot, Captain Davies, who was an old drinking buddy from his Air Force days. Not some mid-level manager he could steamroll with his seniority. Lana Reed was the chief operating officer of Stellara Air, one of the most powerful women in the aviation industry. She was based in the corporate headquarters in Chicago, 1,000 miles away, and was known for her razor-sharp intellect and zero-tolerance policy for anything that threatened the airline's reputation or safety. Her direct involvement was a 5-alarm fire. "Michael, this is Lana Reed. Am I speaking to you and First Officer Thorne?" Her voice was calm, almost unnervingly so, with an undercurrent of surgical steel. "Lana, this is Mike," Jensen began, trying to inject a note of familiar warmth of old-timer to executive. "We have a bit of a situation here. A simple crew compatibility issue. Nothing to—" "Stop!" She cut him off the single word, silencing him instantly. "I don't want your summary, Michael. I want a series of yes or no answers. First, is the aircraft in a safe and secure state at the gate? Yes, Jensen mumbled. Are the passengers and cabin crew safe? Yes. First Officer Thorne, she said, her tone shifting slightly, becoming more direct. Are you fit and willing to perform your duties for Flight 710? Yes, ma'am. I am, Marcus replied, his voice a paradigm of clarity. Thank you, Mr. Thorne. Now, Captain Jensen. Lana continued, her voice hardening again. Did you or did you not inform First Officer Thorne that you refused to fly with him? Jensen hesitated. He was being boxed in his flimsy excuse of compatibility being systematically dismantled. I expressed a lack of comfort with the cockpit dynamic. Captain Jensen, this is not a therapy session. This is a multi-million-dollar aircraft with over 400 people on board, and it is currently sitting immobile at the busiest airport in the world because of your actions. I will ask you one more time. Yes or no? Did you refuse to conduct the flight with your assigned first officer? The weight of her position, the gravity of the situation, finally began to penetrate Jensen's armor of arrogance. Yes, he conceded, the word tasting like ash. And did you provide Mr. Thorne with a specific, actionable, performance-related reason for this refusal as required by Section 11, Subsection 4 of the Stellara Air Operations Manual? Jensen was silent. He knew the manual inside and out. He also knew he hadn't followed it. I am taking your silence as a no, Lana said, her voice now devoid of any warmth. Michael, what you have just done is not only a catastrophic breach of company policy, it is a violation of federal aviation regulations regarding crew management and a flagrant act of insubordination. You have manufactured a safety issue where none existed, and in doing so you have created a real one. She paused, letting the indictment hang in the suffocating silence. A new crew is being scrambled for Flight 710. They will be there within the hour. The passengers will be deplaned and given vouchers. This incident is already costing the company upwards of $150,000, and the reputational damage is incalculable. Jensen felt a desperate need to defend himself. Lana, with all due respect, my 30 years of service, your 30 years of service just ended. She said, the words landing like guillotine blades. As of this moment, Michael Jensen, you are suspended from all duties, pending termination. Your flight privileges are revoked. Your security credentials will be deactivated in 5 minutes. A Stellara security team is on its way to the gate to escort you from the airport. You will leave the flight log, your ID, and any other company property on your seat. Do you understand? Me? It was an execution, swift, brutal, and absolute. Jensen couldn't breathe. His entire identity. Captain Jensen, the sky god, the master of the Boeing 777, had just been vaporized by a voice on the radio. "You can't do this," he whispered, a pathetic plea. "I already have," Lana replied, her voice cold as the stratosphere. "Mr. Thorne, you will remain on the flight deck until the relief crew arrives. You will brief them on the status of the aircraft. A representative from my office will be in touch with you tomorrow. Thank you for your professionalism, under what I can only imagine were exceptionally difficult circumstances. Stellara Air does not tolerate this behavior. Not now, not ever. Read out." The frequency went dead. Michael Jensen sat there, a statue of a man, his face pale and slack. He looked at his hands, the hands that had guided aircraft through thunderstorms and engine failures, and they seemed alien to him. He looked at Marcus Thorne, who was not gloating, not even looking at him, but was simply staring ahead at the instruments, a professional to the very end. In that moment, Jensen didn't just feel defeated. He felt erased. The hum of the cockpit he had loved was gone. The authority he had wielded like a scepter was gone. His career was gone. All because of a single ugly impulse he had mistaken for strength. The cockpit door opened. 2 uniformed airport security officers and a grim-faced Stellara manager stood there. "Captain Jensen," the manager said, avoiding his eyes, "we need you to come with us." Slowly, like a man twice his age, Michael Jensen unbuckled his seatbelt for the last time. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. Michael Jensen wasn't just fired, he was excommunicated. The story, though, officially kept under wraps by Stellara Air to avoid a PR nightmare spread through the tight-knit aviation community like wildfire. The unofficial channels pilot forums, text message chains, barroom whispers from New York to Hong Kong, all told the same story. Captain Jensen, the legend, had self-destructed on the tarmac at JFK. He was placed on the FAA's Do Not Hire list, not officially for racism, but for the far more damning charge of gross insubordination and willfully compromising the safety of a flight. No other major airline would touch him. His phone calls to old friends and colleagues went unreturned. The man who once commanded the respect of an entire industry was now a pariah. His life at home crumbled. His wife Laura, who had built her entire social standing around being married to a senior international captain, was mortified. The quiet, insidious shame of it all curdled their 35-year marriage. They had lived in a sprawling home in a wealthy Connecticut suburb, paid for by decades of a pilot's salary. Now, with his income gone and his pension in jeopardy pending the official results of the internal investigation, that lifestyle was evaporating. After 2 months of simmering in a toxic stew of self-pity and rage, Jensen did what entitled men do when the world no longer bends to their will. He decided he was the victim. He hired a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but David Chen, a bulldog known for high-profile, aggressive, wrongful termination lawsuits. Jensen painted a picture for Chen, a carefully edited narrative, where he was a veteran pilot punished for raising a legitimate, if instinctual, safety concern in an era of woke corporate overreach. "They're railroading me, David," Jensen insisted, his voice full of manufactured indignation. "This kid Thorne, he was arrogant, cocky. I felt he wasn't in the right headspace for a transatlantic flight. I made a command decision, and they fired me for it. They're sacrificing a 30-year veteran for the sake of optics. This isn't about safety. It's about their diversity agenda. David Chen, a pragmatist who cared more about billable hours and winning than an abstract truth, saw an angle. He could frame it as a case of ageism and reverse discrimination, a decorated older pilot being pushed out for a younger minority hire. It was a narrative that would play well in certain media circles. The lawsuit was filed Michael Jensen versus Stellara Air. It demanded $10 million in damages for wrongful termination defamation and emotional distress. Stellara Air's response was swift. They brought in their top legal firm, and Lana Reed made it clear to her team, "We do not settle. We fight this and we win. We will make an example of him." The lawsuit triggered the discovery phase, a legal process where both sides are required to turn over all relevant documents and submit to depositions. Stellara's legal team began meticulously combing through every bite of Michael Jensen's 30-year career. They pulled his flight records, his training reports, his simulator evaluations, and every single incident report he had ever filed or been named in. Meanwhile, Marcus Thorne was called in to give his deposition. He sat in a sterile conference room facing David Chen and a court reporter. For 3 hours, Chen grilled him, trying to poke holes in his story, trying to paint him as inexperienced, confrontational, or oversensitive. "Mr. Thorne, wouldn't you agree that the cockpit is a high-pressure environment?" Chen asked. "Yes," Marcus replied calmly, "and that crew compatibility, while subjective, is a real factor in maintaining safety during a long-haul flight. I agree that a professional and functional dynamic is essential. I have never had an issue creating one with any other captain in my career. So Captain Jensen is the only one out of dozens, perhaps hundreds of pilots you've flown with. He is the only one to ever raise a concern." Chen pressed, hoping to make Marcus seem like a common denominator in a non-existent pattern of conflict. "That is correct," Marcus said, his voice unwavering. "Captain Jensen is the only pilot who has ever refused to fly with me after looking at my face." The simple, powerful truth of the statement silenced David Chen for a moment. Marcus Thorne was unflappable, his testimony a perfect record of professionalism. He was not the weak link in the case, he was its anchor. Back at Stellara's legal department, a young paralegal named Amy was sifting through a mountain of digitized files from the 1990s Jensen's early years with the airline. Most of it was mundane. Then she found a flag, an internal safety report from 1995. It was a minor incident, a near-runway incursion at Chicago O'Hare that never made the news. The report was filed by then First Officer Michael Jensen. He described how his captain had been momentarily distracted, and Jensen had to take control to prevent a collision with a taxiing 737. But the bulk of the report focused on what Jensen claimed was the root cause, a faulty brake pressure reading from the ground maintenance crew. He was adamant, blaming the near miss on a sloppy and incompetent mechanic who signed off on the pre-flight check. The report was scathing. Jensen's language was arrogant and dismissive, even as a junior officer. He recommended the mechanic be fired and blacklisted. A follow-up note in the file indicated the airline had launched an investigation, but the mechanic, under immense pressure, had quit before its conclusion. The incident was officially closed with a note of commendation added to Jensen's file for his decisive action. It seemed like a dead end, just another example of Jensen's arrogance. But Amy, being thorough, cross-referenced the name of the mechanic mentioned in the report. His name was Robert Thorne. Her heart skipped a beat. She ran the name through the employee database. Robert Thorne had worked for Stellara as a mechanic from 1988 until his abrupt resignation in 1995. She pulled up his old employee file. In the section for emergency contact next of kin, there was a single entry listed: his son, Marcus Thorne. Amy felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't just a random act of bigotry on the tarmac at JFK. This was a ghost story, 25 years in the making. She picked up her phone and called the lead attorney on the case. "You need to see this," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. "I think I just found the whole story." The revelation sent shockwaves through Stellara Air's legal team. Lana Reed was briefed immediately. She sat in her office on the 50th floor of a Chicago skyscraper, the file open on her desk, the city lights twinkling below like a silent, indifferent witness. "His father," she said, her voice a low murmur. The man Jensen blames in this report from '95 was Marcus Thorne's father, Robert Thorne, confirmed the lead counsel, a sharp lawyer named Maria Flores. Worked as a mechanic for us for 7 years. Excellent record until this one incident. Jensen's report absolutely destroyed him. We dug a little deeper. After he resigned, he was effectively blacklisted. Jensen's report was so vitriolic, and since he was seen as the hero who saved the plane, his version of events became the official story. Robert Thorne couldn't get another job with a major carrier. He ended up doing freelance work on small prop planes, fell on hard times. Passed away 10 years ago from a heart attack. The family always maintained the stress of the accusation ruined his health. Lana felt a knot of ice form in her stomach. The case had transformed. This was no longer just about a bigoted pilot and a wrongful termination suit. It was about a hidden generational injustice. Michael Jensen hadn't just refused to fly with a black co-pilot. He had years ago savaged the reputation of that co-pilot's father to advance his own career. "Does Marcus know?" Lana asked. "We don't think so," Maria replied. "Marcus was just a kid when this happened. He might not even connect the two events. The question is, how do we use this? It's dynamite." They debated the strategy. They could approach Marcus, tell him what they'd found, and prepare him. But that felt like manipulating their own witness. They could enter the report as evidence to establish a pattern of behavior in Jensen, but Chen would argue it was an unrelated incident from decades ago. Then Maria Flores devised a plan. It was risky, theatrical, and utterly ruthless. "We don't tell Marcus," she said, "and we don't introduce the report beforehand. We save it. We save it for Jensen's deposition. We'll let him build his own gallows, and then we'll hand him the rope." The day of Michael Jensen's deposition arrived. He walked into the law firm's conference room with a confident swagger, David Chen at his side. He saw himself as a righteous warrior fighting for his good name. He was ready. For the first 4 hours, Maria Flores questioned him about the events at JFK. Jensen stuck to his script, repeating the lies he had told himself so many times they had started to feel like the truth. He painted Marcus Thorne as inexperienced, aggressive, and a threat to his command authority. "I have a sixth sense for these things," Jensen said, leaning forward earnestly. "A captain's intuition is the most valuable safety tool on any aircraft. My gut told me something was wrong with Thorne." "But you can't point to a single regulation he violated, a single error he made," Maria asked coolly. "It's not about regulations. It's about the intangible feel of a cockpit. He wasn't the right fit." Maria let the answer hang in the air, allowing its weakness to be exposed by the silence. Then she shifted gears. "Captain Jensen, I'd like to talk about your early career. You were commended for your actions during a near miss at O'Hare in June of 1995. Correct?" Jensen preened a flicker of a smile on his lips. "That's correct. A runway incursion. I took control from my captain and prevented a catastrophe." "And your report at the time," Maria said, sliding a document across the polished table, "placed the blame squarely on a ground mechanic, isn't that right?" David Chen leaned over and glanced at the paper. It looked like a standard incident report. He saw no danger. "Objection relevance," he said, more out of habit than concern. "I'm establishing a pattern of Captain Jensen's intuition when it comes to judging the competence of others," Maria said smoothly. "Please, Captain, tell us what you remember about that incident." Jensen launched into the story, with relish casting himself as the hero. He described the faulty brake, reading the lurch of the aircraft, his own split-second reaction. "It was a classic case of incompetence on the ground," he concluded smugly. "The mechanic signed off on a plane that wasn't safe. I made sure management knew about it. A man like that had no business being near an airliner." "You felt he was a danger?" Maria pressed. "Absolutely. A menace. I did the industry a favor by reporting him." "And you never considered that there could have been another explanation? A sensor malfunction, perhaps? An intermittent electrical fault that wouldn't have shown up on his pre-flight check?" Jensen scoffed. "That's just excuses. I know incompetence when I see it. It was the man, not the machine." Maria paused, letting his arrogant certainty fill the room. She looked down at her notes, then back up her eyes, locking onto his. "The mechanic you reported, Captain Jensen, the man whose career you single-handedly ended, do you remember his name?" Jensen frowned, searching his memory. "No, of course not. It was 30 years ago. Some guy. His name was Robert Thorne." Maria said, her voice quiet, but carrying the force of a battering ram. Jensen blinked. The name meant nothing to him. "Okay. So." David Chen, however, suddenly sat bolt upright. He had read Marcus Thorne's deposition. The name was familiar. A cold dread began to creep up his spine. "Maria, where is this going?" he demanded. Maria ignored him, her focus entirely on Jensen. "Robert Thorne, Captain. After your report, he was unable to find work with any major airline again. He died a broken man. Do you feel any remorse for that?" "I feel nothing," Jensen said defiantly. "He was incompetent. He got what he deserved." Maria nodded slowly. "I see." She opened a second file and slid another document across the table. It was a single page, a copy of a birth certificate. "Captain Jensen," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "I have one final question for you today. Can you please look at this document and read the name listed under father?" Jensen picked up the paper, a flicker of annoyance on his face. He glanced down. He read the name of the father, Robert Thorne. Then he read the name of the son, Marcus Thorne. Time stopped. The air in the room became thick and unbreathable. Jensen stared at the paper, his brain refusing to connect the dots. Robert, Marcus, Thorne, the mechanic, the co-pilot, the past and the present collided in a blinding, horrifying flash. It wasn't a coincidence. The universe wasn't that random. He looked up from the paper, his smug confidence gone, replaced by a ghastly pale shock. He looked at Maria Flores, and in her cold, unforgiving eyes, he saw the abyss that had just opened up beneath his feet. He hadn't just tried to ruin one man's career because of the color of his skin. He had, by a sickening twist of fate, tried to do it to the son of a man whose life he had already destroyed. The deposition room, once a stage for Michael Jensen's arrogance, became his tomb. The birth certificate lay on the table like a death warrant. David Chen. His lawyer stared at it, then at his client's ashen face, and he knew with the chilling certainty of a seasoned attorney that the case was not just lost. It was annihilated. I didn't know. Jensen stammered the words hollow. It was the truth, but it was a truth that offered no sanctuary. In fact, it made it worse. His prejudice was so blind, so random that he hadn't even recognized the name. He had set out to destroy a man for being black, only to discover he was attacking the legacy of a man he had already wronged for entirely different but equally specious reasons. Maria Flores leaned back in her chair, her work done. She didn't need to press him further. Jensen's face, a canvas of dawning horror and guilt, was more damning than any confession. The court reporter's fingers flew across the stenotype, capturing every nuance of the catastrophic silence. "We need to take a break," David Chen said, his voice strained. He grabbed Jensen by the arm and pulled him out of the room. In the hallway, Jensen collapsed against a wall, gasping for air. "It's a trick," he panted. "They're trying to rattle me." "Is it a trick, Mike?" Chen shot back, his voice raw with fury. "Did you or did you not file that report against Robert Thorne?" Yes, but he was incompetent. The brake pressure. Was there an investigation?" Chen demanded. "A full NTSB inquiry. Did anyone else corroborate your story, or was it just your word, the hot-shot young pilot against a working-class mechanic?" Jensen had no answer. There had been an internal inquiry, but it had stalled when Robert Thorne quit. Jensen's version became the default truth because it was the easiest one. It made him a hero and provided a simple scapegoat. "They've been sitting on this, Mike," Chen hissed, pacing the hallway. "They let you walk in there and build this narrative of yourself as the veteran protector of the skies, guided by infallible instinct. And then they showed the whole world that your instinct is just a cover for your petty prejudices and a 30-year-old lie. You didn't just perjure yourself in spirit, you destroyed your own character on the record. We're done. The lawsuit is over." "No, we fight," Jensen pleaded, desperation in his eyes. "With what?" Chen scoffed. "They will paint you as a racist who by a karmic miracle was confronted by the son of a man whose life you already ruined. No jury in the world will side with you. You're not a victim, Mike. You're a villain in a story you wrote yourself." That afternoon, David Chen formally withdrew the lawsuit. There was no settlement. Jensen was left with nothing but his own colossal legal bills and the smoldering wreckage of his reputation. But the story didn't end there. Stellara Air, now armed with a deposition that amounted to a confession of a decades-long injustice, was no longer content with just firing Jensen. Lana Reed made a decision. She called Marcus Thorne and asked him to come to the headquarters in Chicago. In her office overlooking Lake Michigan, she and Maria Flores laid out the entire story for him, presenting the old incident report and the deposition transcripts. Marcus listened in stunned silence, his professional composure finally cracking. He had grown up with the shadow of his father's failure. He'd known his dad had lost his job and his passion, but the details had always been murky, shrouded in his father's shame. Robert Thorne had always told his son, just be twice as good, work twice as hard. Don't give anyone an excuse. Now Marcus understood. His father hadn't failed. He had been failed. He had been a casualty of Michael Jensen's ambition and arrogance. And years later, Marcus himself had been targeted by that same man's blind hatred. "What you've endured, Mr. Thorne," Lana said, her voice filled with a genuine respect, "is beyond the pale. The incident at JFK was inexcusable. But this This new information about your father is a corporate sin that we have a duty to address. Stellara Air issued a public statement. It was a masterclass in corporate accountability. They announced the withdrawal of Jensen's lawsuit and taking the extraordinary step of unsealing parts of the deposition, they told the whole story. They publicly exonerated Robert Thorne, posthumously clearing his name and issuing a formal apology to his family. They announced the creation of the Robert Thorne Memorial Scholarship, a multi-million-dollar fund to support underprivileged students pursuing careers in aviation maintenance and engineering. The story became a national sensation. Marcus Thorne was hailed as a hero, not just for his composure in the cockpit, but for being the living embodiment of a justice long delayed. He was interviewed by major news networks, a reluctant icon of grace under pressure. For Michael Jensen, the public revelation was the final fatal blow. His wife, Laura, finally left him unable to bear the public disgrace and the knowledge of the deep, cruel injustice her husband had perpetrated. His friends, the few who had remained, now shunned him completely. The bank foreclosed on their Connecticut home. His unraveling was total. He had lost his job, his lawsuit, his reputation, his wife, and his home. He was a ghost in his own life, haunted by the consequences of 2 moments of malice separated by a quarter of a century that had finally converged to destroy him. The collapse of Michael Jensen's lawsuit was not an end. It was the beginning of a different kind of punishment, one far more intimate and cruel than any courtroom could dispense. The story now unsealed and propelled by Stellara Air's explosive press release became a media sensation. Jensen was no longer just a disgraced pilot. He was a national symbol of bigoted arrogance, his face splashed across news websites and cable news chyrons. He became a case study, a cautionary tale dissected by pundits and ethicists. The name Jensen became shorthand for a certain kind of obsolete, entitled rage. He retreated to his sprawling Connecticut home, but it was no longer a fortress. The phones rang incessantly with calls from reporters. His wife Laura, who had once basked in the reflected glory of his captaincy, now looked at him with a mixture of horror and contempt. "How could you not tell me?" she demanded one evening, her voice trembling, holding a tablet displaying an article detailing the ruin of Robert Thorne. "You didn't just lie to your lawyer, Michael. You've been lying to me, to yourself, for our entire life together. You built a career on a man's grave." "That's not what happened," Jensen snarled, the same defensive reflex kicking in. "He was incompetent." The report was accurate. "This is just a smear campaign by the airline to cover their own backs." "Was it a smear campaign when you looked at his son and decided without a single word that he was unworthy?" Laura shot back, her voice rising. "Was it your heroic instinct then, too? Or was it just the ugly, rotten thing inside you that you've been hiding all these years? The little comments, the dismissive jokes about the new hires?" I ignored it. I enabled it. I thought it was just you being from a different time. But this is monstrous. That night, she packed her bags. She took her maiden name back and filed for divorce, her petition citing irreconcilable differences rooted in the shocking revelation of moral turpitude. The departure was quiet, clinical, and absolute. There were no tears, no final arguments, just the cold-hard fact of his utter isolation. The financial ruin followed with brutal speed. With no income and crippling legal fees from his failed lawsuit, he could no longer afford the mortgage. The house, once a symbol of his ascent, became a gilded cage, filled with memories of a life that was now a fantasy. He was forced to sell it at a loss in a buyer's market. He sold the luxury cars, the boat, the vacation condo in Florida. Each sale was a public stripping of his identity, a liquidation of his pride. He moved into a small, soulless rental apartment complex by the highway. The roar of traffic, a constant, grating reminder of the engine sounds he so desperately missed. He tried to find other work. He still had a commercial pilot's license, technically. He applied to cargo airlines, charter companies, even small regional carriers in the Midwest. The response was always the same. Sometimes it was a polite, immediate rejection. Other times he would get a preliminary interview, and he would see the moment the hiring manager made the connection, the flicker of recognition in their eyes as they placed his name. The mood would shift, the interview would be cut short. He was radioactive. His name was a liability no insurance underwriter would touch. His pride, the very thing that had caused his downfall, prevented him from seeking work outside of aviation. It was all he knew, all he was. To do anything else would be the final admission of defeat. So he spiraled. He drank starting earlier each day. He watched hours of cable news, yelling at the screen, nurturing the narrative in his head that he was the true victim, a casualty of a world gone mad. He was a king, dethroned not by his own hubris, but by a conspiracy of lesser men. In stark contrast, Marcus Thorne's life ascended. He handled the media storm with the same grace and composure he'd shown in the cockpit. He deflected personal praise, consistently redirecting the narrative to his father's exoneration and the importance of the new scholarship fund. "My father was a brilliant mechanic who loved aviation," he said in one interview. If his story can now help create opportunities for others to pursue their passion with the dignity and respect they deserve, then his legacy is secure. Lana Reed and Stellara Air fast-tracked his command training, not as a favor, but because he had proven under unimaginable pressure that he possessed the temperament of a true leader. His check ride for the captaincy was flawless. The day he pinned on his 4th stripe, he felt the profound weight of the moment. He was not just achieving his own dream, he was fulfilling his father's broken one. He became a quiet mentor within the airline. Young pilots, especially those from minority backgrounds, would seek him out. He never spoke of the Jensen incident unless asked. Instead, he taught them to be unassailable in their professionalism, to know the regulations and their aircraft so thoroughly that no one could ever question their right to be there. He was creating a new culture, one pilot at a time. 3 years after the incident at JFK, the cyclical nature of airline routes brought Captain Marcus Thorne to Salt Lake City International Airport. It was a crisp, rainy Tuesday, the Wasatch Mountains shrouded in mist. His aircraft was a state-of-the-art Boeing 787 Dreamliner, a marvel of carbon fiber and fly-by-wire technology, a plane Michael Jensen could only have dreamed of commanding. As his first officer handled the final shutdown checklist, Marcus began his post-flight walk-around. The rain was cold and persistent, slicking the tarmac and creating a grey, dreary scene. He watched the ground crew move with practiced efficiency, their yellow and orange high-visibility gear, the only spots of color. They were being directed by a supervisor, a man who stood apart. His shoulders hunched against the rain, his authority seemingly worn as a burden. The man's posture was one of deep, weary resignation. He was older, his face gaunt beneath the brim of a faded baseball cap. He barked an order at a baggage handler, and the sound of his voice, a hoarse, gravelly rasp, stripped of its former command, snagged Marcus's attention. He looked closer, his eyes narrowing. The silver hair was greasy and unkempt. The chiseled jaw had dissolved into sagging jowls. But it was him. Unmistakably, it was Michael Jensen. The irony was so thick, so potent, it was almost poetic. After hitting rock bottom, Jensen had finally been forced to take a job outside the cockpit, but still within the prison of the airport. He had become a ramp supervisor, a groundling. His days were now spent in the wind, the rain, and the deafening roar of the engines of the machines he was no longer allowed to fly. His kingdom was no longer the sky, it was this patch of wet concrete. From his miserable vantage point, Jensen looked up at the magnificent Dreamliner he was servicing. He didn't see the pilot walking around it. Not really. He just saw a uniform, a symbol. He saw the 4 golden stripes on the epaulets of the man's jacket and felt the familiar acidic burn of resentment. He saw a young, confident captain, the very picture of the new generation that had, in his warped view, stolen his life. He hated him. He hated him for his youth, for his command, for having the sky that was stolen from him. Their eyes met across the 50 feet of rain-swept tarmac. For Marcus, time seemed to slow down. He saw the man not as a monster, but as a hollowed-out shell. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a dull, vacant bitterness. There was no fire left, only ashes, and in that moment Marcus felt a wave of, not pity, not hatred, not even satisfaction. It was a profound and somber sense of closure. The universe had not punished Michael Jensen with a dramatic bolt of lightning. It had sentenced him to life in the front row of his own failure. Jensen held the gaze for a second longer, a flicker of confusion on his face. There was something about this particular captain's eyes, a calm, steady intensity that felt vaguely familiar, but he couldn't place it. To him, Marcus was just another anonymous face representing his replacement. He grunted, pulled his collar tighter against the rain, and turned away to yell at another baggage handler. He had a job to do. Marcus finished his inspection. He gave a slight formal nod in the direction of the ground crew, a gesture of professional respect he gave to everyone from the gate agent to the cleaner, and turned back toward his aircraft. He climbed the stairs, leaving the cold rain and the broken man behind. As he settled into the captain's seat, the familiar scent of avionics and filtered air, a comforting embrace, he looked out at the sprawling airfield. He saw Jensen below a small figure in a yellow jacket, growing smaller as the jet bridge retracted. He gave the order to push back. The twin engines spooled up with a deep, powerful hum, a sound of limitless potential. As the 787 taxied toward the runway, Marcus guided it with a light, confident touch. Cleared for takeoff, he advanced the throttles, and the immense aircraft surged forward, pressing him back into his seat. It lifted off the ground with a grace that defied its size, climbing steeply into the grey, misty sky. Below Michael, Jensen heard the roar and instinctively looked up. He watched the Dreamliner disappear into the low-hanging clouds, its navigation lights blinking once, twice, and then gone. He stood there for a long moment, the rain dripping from his cap. Another plane on its way to a world he could no longer reach. He then turned back to his crew, his face a mask of weary indifference, and waited for the next aircraft to arrive. He was grounded forever, a spectator to the dreams he had once lived and had so carelessly destroyed. The story of Michael Jensen and Marcus Thorne is a stark reminder that the cockpit of an airplane isn't the only place where character is tested. It's tested in our daily choices, in how we treat others, and in the integrity we show when no one is watching. Jensen's prejudice was a rot that festered for decades, an old injustice that lay dormant like a ghost in the machine, waiting for the right moment to claim its due. His story shows that karma isn't always a lightning bolt from a clear sky. Sometimes it's a slow, grinding process of consequence, a full accounting of a debt that must eventually be paid. In the end, he wasn't grounded by an airline or a regulator. He was grounded by the weight of his own hate. If this story of ultimate karma and delayed justice resonated with you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who appreciates stories of consequence. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. We're dedicated to bringing you more true-life dramas, where accountability isn't just a concept, but a destination. Thank you for listening.